employed all of these villains to basically lure these children to Horrorland and then eventually to his theme park in the streets of Panic Park. Now, his job, along with the other villains, is to scare the kids out of Horrorland and invite them to Panic Park, like I said. But after a turn of events, Slappy and the other villains decide that they want to change sides and help the kids escape because they're tired of the menace controlling them. So the villains, along with Slappy, they help the kids escape and then they just leave. But in the end, it's revealed that Lizzie, the main character of the series, is going home, and she opens her suitcase and she finds Slappy, the ventriloquist dummy, inside her suitcase, going to enslave her. So thus that leaves a lot of things in the air. And we don't see him again until later on in the Slappy Horrorland series, where it is Slappy New Year. So we see him again in book 18 of Horrorland, Slappy New Year. Now, in this book, we don't really know what happens because Slappy is once again at Horrorland and he is on sale in Chiller House, which is basically the gift shop there at Horrorland. And my guess is that Lizzie returns Slappy to Horrorland and just gives him to Jonathan Chiller, who just puts him on sale. Well, he is bought by this kid named Ray Gordon, and he brings Slappy home. Slappy causes a load of trouble, as usual, and it turns out that he was framed by Brandon, Ray's brother. So it turns out that Slappy isn't actually alive, but that he has been made to become alive by Ray's brother, Brandon. But at a party, once again, what is it with parties and Slappy? He comes to life and actually ruins everything. He is then taken home, and after a big battle, Slappy is put to sleep. But then Ray's mom supposedly wakes him up again accidentally by reading the paper she finds, and it supposedly brings Slappy back to life. Now, that's the last time we see Slappy until the next series in Goosebumps Most Wanted. And we see him in Book 2, Son of Slappy. Basically, a nice kid named Jackson Strander visits his grandpa, who gives him Slappy. It is unknown how Slappy got to that house. It's kind of confusing because Jackson Strander's grandpa acts like he's had Slappy for a long, long time. So it's kind of weird, but my guess is that perhaps Ray just gives Slappy to the old man. I'm not really sure what happens. It doesn't really make too much sense. However, Slappy controls Jackson. This is the first time Slappy's actually had control, literally, over another human being. He can control Jackson, and he causes him to do all kinds of bad things. In the end, Jackson finds out that his sister, Rachel, has been working with Slappy, which is like the first time a supposedly good guy has been working with a bad guy like that. I mean, that's pretty crazy. It's pretty diabolical. I think I can imagine my sister doing that, but whatever. So he finds out that his sister basically has been working with Slappy to bring down Jackson. And that's what he finds out at the very end. That's the very last twist in the book. Now, we start a whole series all about Slappy. Quite recently, R.L. Stine in 2017 has created his own series all about Slappy, with the first book being Slappy World, Slappy Birthday to You. Now, this whole series, Slappy World, is basically Slappy's world, and he narrates most of the stories. Now, in this first book, Slappy Birthday to You, it's not known why Slappy leaves Rachel, because Rachel was actually his friend, and so it wouldn't really make any sense. Then again, this is Slappy World, and Slappy is just almost telling a story. So could this have been something that's happened to him before, and he's just now telling it? So perhaps he is still at Rachel's. After all, it is Slappy World, and Slappy is in control. But we will assume, however, that Rachel lost Slappy, and he is found by a doll collector, because in this book, a random doll collector has Slappy and has fixed him up. And so he almost acts like he's built him, which is very odd due to the fact that we know he didn't build him. So it also might be possible that Jackson asked Mr. Barker, which is a boy named Ian's dad, to fix the dummy. But sending no return address, because that's what happens. Mr. Barker has to fix the dummy and gets no return address whatsoever, and that's how this new kid, Ian, gets left with the dummy. And so, whatever the case may be, the previous owner did not want the dummy. A year passes, and Mr. Barker gives the dummy to Ian as a present, not knowing of his evil. So Vinny and Johnny, which are Ian's cousins, another thing with cousins, like, cousins are a big part in these Goosebumps series, and they're almost always annoying. Don't ask me why. Okay, so they take Slappy away, and they try to scare Ian and make Ian think that Slappy is alive. But while at the cousin's house, Slappy causes a load of trouble, as usual, like I said. And the boys return Slappy and team up with Ian to put the dummy to sleep. Slappy stops them and brings all the broken dolls in the dad's shop to life. He is stopped by Abigail, which is a doll owned by Ian's sister. Slappy's head is literally removed, and he goes back to sleep. Abigail, however, is evil, surprise, surprise, and like Slappy, she wants to enslave Ian and his entire family. And that's where that book ends. So we wonder kind of what happened to Slappy, and in the end, Slappy narrating says not to worry about him. And so I don't really know what happens. And so the next book is Attack of the Jack. And even though it is in Slappy World, it doesn't actually feature Slappy other than the fact that he narrates it. So it is probable that his head is fixed due to the fact that he is talking and narrating this next story. But other than that, he isn't really featured in the story whatsoever other than narrating it. Now, the newest book that just recently came out and I just read is I Am Slappy's Evil Twin. Now, this book I was really excited about. It was actually one of the best because his origin is finally explained in detail. In 1920, Slappy and his identical twin, Snappy, are made by a fearful old craftsman and sorcerer. The man had fled England after his friend, a magician, brings his old dummy, Mr. Wood, back to life. While living in a village in the United States, the villagers steal and burn Snappy, but Slappy, his twin, still remains alive. Now, this reveals some very important things in both Mr. Wood and Slappy's life. This reveals a couple of things. First off, it reveals the origin of Slappy and Wally. Is Wally really Mr. Wood? That's a whole other question. I'd like to say that they are the same person. If not, it still makes sense. Mr. Wood must have been sent off, and that is how we find him in the first book. Somehow, that magician who ended up with Mr. Wood just sent off Mr. Wood and got rid of him, and that's how he's in the first book. This makes sense now that we know his origin. Since he was supposed to have died in Living Dummy, Wally very well could have been just another dummy. So we also know that Mr. Wood isn't Snappy, because at first when I said Slappy's evil twin, I just speculated that it was going to be Mr. Wood, due to the fact that Mr. Wood was previously identified as his twin. But what I'm guessing is the old man just made the twins to look like Mr. Wood, since Mr. Wood was his old dummy. Thus, after Snappy and Mr. Wood die, Slappy lives and goes on many other adventures. Hint, all the other books that I've been explaining to you. So this actually happens out of chronological order. This is actually the introduction that we really get to Slappy, and this tells how Slappy ends up in his first book, basically. And in this book, Slappy and Snappy, who is somehow alive again, are back together and they don't ever want to be apart again. They cause a lot of trouble for Luke, whose dad is a horror director and makes all kinds of horror movies in Hollywood, and his dad gets these two dummies, but eventually is going to split them apart. And so they don't want to be split apart, and they wreak a lot of havoc for Luke and his sister, making their dad think that they are crazy because they keep telling him about these living dummies, and his dad doesn't believe them. In the climax, Slappy starts fighting with Snappy, who's nice, actually. This whole time, Snappy has been identified as a nice dummy. And the dad finally realizes that they're bad, but not in time before Slappy and Snappy fight and blow up part of the house. And so, boom, it's blown up. Part of Luke's house is just completely destroyed. And one of the dummies, identified as Slappy, flies all the way down the hill and so supposedly dies. And the dad is about to burn Snappy, but Luke decides to keep Snappy, thinking that he's nice. Guess what? Surprise, surprise, he isn't. And that's the end of Slappy's history. Hopefully Slappy will be back for another book. We know that there are going to be more Slappy World books, but so far none of the titles released yet have revealed that Slappy is going to be in one of them. But undoubtedly, since it is Slappy's World, he is going to be featured in another book, because Slappy is just such an amazing character. You cannot let Slappy die. For good, that is, of course. So that's my Slappy history / theories, guys. Thanks for listening in. I'm sorry this video went way longer than expected, but maybe you can just break it up and watch it in different sections. Alright, peace, guys. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow.